Hey guys, it's Jade from Themeco bringing you the fourth installment for the Creative Contact Form series. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I implemented this contact form you're seeing right now. Firstly, I'm going to cover how I implemented the layout of this form, how I created a splitting diagonal background for the section, which didn't involve any custom codes, just playing around the values of the settings of the column. And then I'm going to be showing you how I styled my contact form this way and how I customize the style of my checkboxes. So without further ado, let's jump into the builder and get started. So we're back in the builder and let's get started with our setup. Firstly, the template I'm using for this is a blank, no container, no header, and no footer template. And I have created one section. Let's start by setting a background to this section. And we're just using a background color. In the demo that I've shown you, there is this diagonal line that splits the background color into two colors. So with that, I actually didn't do any custom codes. I didn't add anything. I just simply played with the setup of the section settings. And with that, I used the background separator. So I'm going to show you how to do that. You just turn it on. And I set the angle point to 0. And with this one, let's try to make this the inset value to 20 pixels. So you can see that there is this angle. If you will be able to push it to the top, this would actually look like it will split this into two. And there is no percent value here, but we could use a trick. We could use calc and put in 100%. And now it's on the topmost. And the next is we have to adjust the height of this separator so that it will fill the entire height of this section. And for that, it's 50. If you actually change that to 150, it will adjust. But our goal is to actually fill the entire height of this one. And just what we did to the inset, since there is no percentage value allowed here, we could use calc and put in 100%. And just change the color of this to white. Then change the opacity, like lower the opacity so that you'll have that kind of effect. And let's just try to set the height of this one to 100% or just 100 VH so that you'll be able to actually see the background. So that's how you create that one. You could experiment more in the settings for the bottom separator. Change the angle out, it would flip it. Curve in, curve out. So yeah, it would depend. It's actually very interesting. If you just try to play with the values here, you could come up with different styles. But as for the setup, we'll use angle in. The angle starts at 0 and these values out here. And if you set it to 100%, it would just flip it as well. So it would look as angle out. So that's it, that's the background. And let's create the content for this section. But before that, let's add a top and bottom padding for this section. It has the default 145, but let's just set this to 150 pixels. Then let's create our row with this columns. That's 2 columns. And the other one fills 3/4 of the entire row. and then the other has a 1/4 measurement. And let's set a background color to this column and set the border radius to around, let's say 5. And let's add a heading just so we can fill something in. And let's make sure we have a heading. Let's set it to 2 for now. Next is let's set the shadow that will be placed around this area. So to do that, we could play with the values of the box shadow of our column. So firstly, let's set the X offset to, this is an EM, so maybe we'll put in 0.4. And let's also set the Y offset to around 0.4. Then let's set the color to black. Sorry, that's red. Black, and then just lessen the opacity so that it wouldn't look so harsh. And there you have it, the shadow to our column. Then let's set padding to 0 and then just set it to the column settings. Let's say we'll have 50 or maybe around 60. Okay, let's put in our text. So for now, this is what we all need for our column content. The next thing we're gonna do is to create the form that we'll be adding here. So let's get onto the contact form 7 admin area and create a form out there. So I have here the contact form 7 that I have created, and I thought it would be easier if I finish up my markup for the form and then just explain its structure while showing the result. So for this one, I created nested contents or nested rows. So there are rows that has rows inside it with 2 columns. So just like this is set into one entire row with 2 columns. And then in a row, just like the name and then the email address, there is another row with 2 columns. So that's how I created this one. So for that, I have a 2 column row, which is for the main columns, this 2. And then inside the first column of the row, there are 2 columns, which has the full name and the email address. So that is this. And as for the checkboxes, that is just 1 row. And we're gonna be styling that through CSS later on. So that's just how it is. If you have time, you could analyze the code that we have for the contact form, but that's just the essence of it, like nested rows for this setup so that it would be easier. So since we created this one, we could add this to our column in our builder as a contact form 7 element. So let's try to add the contact form 7 we have created to our column now. But first, let's set the angle back to 0. Oops. there, so that it will reflect the demo we created. And let's search for the contact form. I can't type. Let's add that and select that creative contact form. So this is the default display of our form, and it's overflowing because we added the code to our element CSS. So let's now start adding the CSS code so that our form here will look more attractive. So let's go to the CSS content panel, and just like our previous videos, we could just reuse the codes for the layout, and that is this. So basically we set the display value of our rows to flex, the justify content to space between, and the flex wrap to wrap. And let's write the CSS for the 2 columns. And by the way, I have the contact form 7 code open here so that we could reference it while we're writing our custom codes. So for the 2 column rows, we should first write the selector to target that, 2 calls, and then column or call. Then let's set the flex basis to 48%. And we set it to 48% so that there's going to be a gap between the columns, since our justify content is spaced between. And now we have 2 columns, but as what you can see, this area, what kind of work do you need help with? Actually, that is just a row with 1 column, but then it displays with the width of 48%. That is because when we write our custom CSS, row that 2 calls, that is this and this, so basically all the rows with 2 calls class, and columns inside it will all get 48%. So here, this doesn't have 2 calls, but then it's inside a row with 2 calls, so the call class inside it also gets affected. To solve that, we could add this to our selector. What this CSS selector means is that the call div with this class that will get affected are only those direct children of row that calls. So let's dig a bit deeper into that. So the direct children. So for this, 2 calls and row, the direct children would be these calls, these 2. So those will have 48%. And this call is not a direct child for this call because it's inside another row div, so it will not be affected. But this call, or these calls, are affected because they are direct children of row and 2 calls. So that's just explanation for that CSS trick. Well, it's not even a trick, it's more like a CSS selector available so that you could use it in case you run into situations like this. So that's that, and let's continue styling our form. And then let's style the text in our form accordingly. But let's first adjust the width of this, probably around this. And let's put in the code to change the font size, font weight, and then the font color of the paragraphs, and the labels that are inside the form. So that would be this. So this is for the paragraph tags, and then the labels, which the labels are used for the label of the text elements, and then the text input elements, the email address, text area, and the checkbox. So the concept form 7 generates labels for each of the text option, and that's that. And then I also set the line height and then the margins around those HTML elements. Then let's now style the form elements, which are these. So this, we have the WPCF7 input, type, text, and let's just copy this because that would be the same for input type email for the email address, and then input type date as well. As well as the text area. So WPF7 text area doesn't use the input HTML element, but it uses text area. So for this, let's remove the border and set this to 0. Remove the box shadow and set it to none. And then set the background color of these HTML elements or input elements to, oops, and that's it. You might want to add some padding around it, so let's put in padding 5 pixels. Okay, that should be enough. Maybe put in 12 for the left and right area. So that's that. Let's style the submit button. So to target that, that is WPCF7 input, and the type is submit. Then let's remove the border and set it to 0. That is supposed to be WPCF7. And we want to align it to the right. So in our HTML markup for the form, I added the align right class to the column that contains the submit button. So you can make use of that class, put it somewhere here, dot align right, and set the text align to right. Be careful with that. Now it's on the right side, and let's set a background color to the button. Let's get the background color from this. Set it here, set the color of the text to white. It doesn't matter uppercase or lowercase, it's just personal preference. And set the border radius somewhere around 10 pixels, or it could be more, it depends on how you want the form to be styled. It's more like a pill now, so that's good. Let's add a padding to 20. Is it too much? Let's put 50. Actually, let's try to put this 25. border radius to 30. It's too high, so let's try setting it to 16, and it should be enough. So we style the submit button, and now let's style our checkboxes. And with this, we're not just gonna style the checkboxes, but we're also gonna set the layout of these two checkboxes in every line. So let's write the CSS for that. Let's start by making the layout of our checkboxes and placing them 2 checkboxes in a row. I don't think we're gonna need this, so we can close that. Let's save our work. And for us to determine the CSS selector, so this text box we're gonna apply the CSS styles to, we could go to the front end and inspect. Let's set it to this, then there you go. Let's inspect the element and let's go to the checkbox item. So all of these checkboxes are inside a WPCF7 control, and here there is WPCF7 checkbox. What you can do is copy this. That's the class of the container of all the checkboxes. And the checkboxes are in here. Then set its display to flex, and let's set a flex wrap to wrap. Okay, and let's set the justify content property to space around. And then we want to set each of the checkbox item to 48% so that it will be half of its container. So we'll have 2 checkboxes in each row. So that would be WPCF7 list item. Copy that. And this one, you could either just write that one, or you can make it more specific by doing this and set the flex basis to 48%. Okay, there's something different here. Let's refresh our page and check why is that happening. Let's inspect it. There is a margin. There is a left margin. By default, that is added by the integrity stack for the list item. So that is the margin left. Let's try to get rid of that. Margin left 0. And there you go. Our checkboxes now are set to 2 items per row. So let's now style each of the checkbox item further by adding some background colors and other CSS stylings to them. So for this, we have to check the selector that we're going to be using. So let's go to the front end and inspect this one. And as what you can see here, each of the checkbox element is wrapped in a span tag with a WPCF7 list item class, which what we used here. And we could use that to add the background color, but since it's also wrapped the checkbox itself and then the span tag as a label, they are wrapped in a label tag, then let's use the label tag to target each of the item. So with that, let's put in label. Don't forget the A. Then let's set the background color and set it to be the same as the input items. Set a padding to around 8 pixels. Then set border radius to 5 pixels. That looks better now, but the next thing we need to do is to add a hover effect to each item. So that would be by copying this and adding the hover for this. And let's set the background color to blue, which is this color. And let's try that. And let's also set the color to white. And as we covered before, to add a transition effect, go to the normal state, transition, all. Let's say 3.3 seconds, then ease in. And there you have it. Let's now write the CSS codes to style the checkboxes. But in this case, we're not actually going to style the checkboxes because the way to style them is very limited, if you could even style them. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna use some tricks, CSS tricks, to be able to create some kind of pseudo checkboxes. And we're gonna use the pseudo elements for that one. Remember the before and after pseudo elements, which we covered in the previous videos of this series, or I think it was in the creative column series. So for this one, we're actually gonna get rid of the checkboxes. So let's inspect our front end, and that is the input type checkbox that is inside the list item, or we could even put the label in. So that, and let's copy this, input, so that is the selector input type checkbox, and we're gonna set the position of that to absolute and the left to a negative 99999 pixels. That way it will be around way out the screen, but in essence it's still here if you inspect the code. And next is let's create the pseudo checkboxes we're going to be using for this one. And with that, we're going to use the before pseudo element, and that is the checkbox. Let's copy this and let's go back to our front end, and we're going to be using the span tag that is next to the checkbox. So there is a CSS selector, or we could make a CSS selector to be able to target this span. We could use the plus CSS selector, that is the adjacent selector. So if we're gonna write it this way, input type checkbox plus span, it would target this span tag next to it. So for example, if you put in WPF7 list item space label plus input, what's going to be targeted are the checkboxes. So that's it. And we're gonna use the before pseudo selector. And the first thing is set the content. Then let's put a width, let's say 1.25 EM, and also the height to 1.25 EM. So that would be square. Then display block. So that is around here now. Let's set the border to 1 pixel solid CCC, a grayish color. Then set the background color to white. Then let's set the box shadow to inset these values. And let's save that and refresh our front end. And you're not gonna see anything yet because we have to add some more code so that we'll be able to put in a check mark when the checkbox is checked. But now you see that our before pseudo element is now present, which will be the layout of our checkbox. And lastly, let's style that and make that round by setting the border radius to 50%. And now that is round shape. Then let's set the position of this to absolute, left being 0 and top to 0. And it went out of the area, so let's set the span tag to position relative, and now it's back to its area. And let's put in a left padding to our span tag so that the text will be pushed to the right. So that's padding left 1.25 EM. That's the width of our checkbox. Maybe let's say this is 1.5 or 1.65. So there you have it. We now have our round checkbox. It actually looks like a radio button, but that should be fine for this setup. And let's maybe adjust the padding of our label to around 10. And let's leave the left and right padding to 8 pixels. And there. Next is, once we select a checkbox item or an option, we should add a check mark inside it. Checkboxes, or now let's refer to it as the styled checkboxes because they don't look like checkboxes anymore. And for that, we're going to be using the after pseudo element. So let's start to create the CSS code for that. Let's copy this and use the after pseudo element and content. For this one, since we're going to be using a check mark, I'm going to show you how we could use the CSS way to add a font awesome icon using the content property. So let's put that in here, and let's try to put an icon element here. And let's select the light icon, then find the check mark and set that here. Then let's save it. Let's go to the front end, refresh, and right click. And right now we have the icon code out here. What we'll be needing is the Unicode value of this icon, and we cannot find that here. So we'll have to go to the Font Awesome website and check for the actual font that we're gonna use. And for this light style check mark, this is the Unicode. So you just have to copy the Unicode, go back to our CSS, and put in slash and the Unicode. And right now it's still showing up as square. To make that right, we need to go back and select our icon and notice that the icon has a font family and font weight. All we need to do is copy that and paste that there. And now there is our check mark. So that is just a quick tip. If you want to add an icon through CSS way. And let's set the color of this check mark to the same color as our button. Copy that. And then let's set its position to absolute, then left to 0 and top to 0. And let's adjust the left value to 0.1 EM, 3, 4, and top would be negative 0.1 EM, 1.5, negative 2, I just 1. Okay, that volume might be right. And now we have the checkboxes, but what we want to do is only have the checkbox when the checkbox is selected. And that is actually very easy. We could just do that by updating our CSS selector and targeting the checkbox and adding the checked pseudo selector. And now they're gone, but when we select a checkbox, they will be checked. So that's it. And next, let's adjust the height of this text area after this checkboxes list. So for that, I added an ID to the checkbox or the text area, and that is set to other services. We could just target that through the ID, then set the height to 100 pixels, and that should be enough. Let's save that, and let's close this. Let's go back to the front end, refresh our page, and also add the CSS for the validations. So let's target the validation errors. The little WPC of 7up valid tip. We could just add that to the P. So it will have the same font sizes. Let's save it, but let's change the color to red. It's FF40 and save it. Let's refresh and send it, and there you have it. And lastly, let's put the image that we plan to add here. And let's first remove the icon, delete, go to the row setting, set the background lower image to the computer. Then now you can see the image here, but let's set the first value to the left, then center, so that it will start from the left. And let's save it, and let's refresh our page here. And there we have it. We now have our image and our validation styling and our custom checkboxes. The only thing about here is that if you want to leave the background color of each checkbox element to blue when you select an item, you would have to add some jQuery or any JavaScript code to do that, because by just using CSS, our ability to add that kind of styling is limited. So yeah, if you plan to add that effect, then feel free to go the JavaScript way. And another thing that I failed to mention in the previous tutorials is that when you import the Design Cloud templates for the forms and you see some unnecessary spacing, that is because by default WPC of 7 has the WP Auto P enabled. So to disable that, you could either go to the functions.php of your child theme and add some code, which is appearance, theme editor, theme function PHP, and this one. This is a PHP way to disable the auto P for the contact form 7, and make sure that you have the child theme installed so that you can put this to the function.php of the child theme. Another way to do that is through CSS approach, which will be something like WPC of 7 BR, then display none. So either way will work, but it would be better if you do the PHP way, just in case you'll add more forms. You won't need to keep on adding this code. So that's it for this video, guys. So we have learned how to create the splitting background color and style our checkboxes, and also a way to add a font awesome icon through CSS. We hope that this video is useful for you, and we look forward to bringing you more videos. Thanks for watching and have a good one.